Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, carries a longer subtitle that tells you exactly where it's headed: how the great rewiring of childhood is causing an epidemic of mental illness. Haidt is a social psychologist at NYU Stern, and his central claim is that the sharp rise in anxiety, depression, self-harm, and suicide among adolescents that began around 2010 to 2012 is not a mystery and not a media panic. It has an identifiable cause. Childhood shifted from being play-based to being phone-based, and two forces collided at the very same historical moment to make that happen. The first was the decline of unsupervised free play in the real world, starting back in the 1980s and 90s, driven by a culture of safety obsession and helicopter parenting. The second was the rise of smartphones and social media, roughly between 2010 and 2015, when front-facing cameras, high-speed wireless internet, and platforms like Instagram, Snapchat, and later TikTok became ubiquitous, and when the like button and algorithmic feeds took over. Haidt calls this combination the great rewiring of childhood. Kids lost the free play they need to become resilient and gained a device that overstimulates, fragments attention, disrupts sleep, and fosters social comparison. Right at the moment their brains are most sensitive to social feedback. He backs this up with data, working alongside collaborators like Jean Twenge, whose earlier research on what she called iGen laid the groundwork for this book. Haidt presents graphs showing that rates of teen depression, anxiety, self-harm, and suicide were flat or even declining through the 2000s, then began rising sharply around 2012, especially among girls. The timing lines up closely with a cluster of events. Facebook opened to under 18s in 2006, and later went fully mobile. Instagram launched in 2012, having introduced the like button back in 2009. Smartphones with front-facing cameras proliferated, and the average number of hours teens spent on screens and social media each day kept climbing. Haidt is careful to say correlation isn't proof, and he spends real effort defending the causal claim against critics who call it merely correlation. He points to experimental and quasi-experimental studies, natural experiments like the staggered rollout of high-speed internet across different U.S. counties, and cross-national data showing the same trend across the U.S., the U.K., Canada, Australia, and the Nordic countries, tracking each country's own pattern of smartphone adoption. From there, he breaks down the psychological damage into 4 foundational harms of the phone-based childhood. The first is social deprivation. Time once spent with peers face-to-face is now spent alone on a screen, even when a teenager feels connected online, because in person, interaction is rich with nonverbal cues and physical presence that a feed simply can't replicate. The second is sleep deprivation. Phones in bedrooms push back bedtimes, invite nighttime notifications, and disrupt the sleep cycles that are critical for adolescent brain development and emotional regulation. The third is attention fragmentation. Constant notifications and app switching train the brain toward distraction, undermining the sustained attention that learning, deep thought, and flow states require. And the fourth is addiction. Social media and gaming platforms are deliberately engineered through variable reward schedules, infinite scroll, and streaks to maximize engagement, exploiting adolescent brains that have high dopamine sensitivity and still developing self-control. Haidt also argues this plays out differently for girls and boys. Girls are more exposed to visual social comparison on platforms like Instagram and TikTok, and to relational aggression amplified online, things like exclusion, rumors, and cyberbullying, and they're more likely to internalize that distress as anxiety and depression. The steepest rise in self-harm and depression shows up specifically among girls between 10 and 14. Boys, on the other hand, are drawn more toward gaming, YouTube, and pornography, which Haidt links to social withdrawal, a failure to launch into adult responsibilities, and a shift toward digital rather than real-world risk-taking. He describes it as a retreat from embodied, effortful, real-world experience into something lower effort and higher stimulation. To explain why this all matters so developmentally, he offers a central framework: discover mode versus defend mode. Childhood evolved to unfold in discover mode, a state of curiosity, exploration, and risk tolerance that builds competence and courage, especially through free, unsupervised play that includes some real risk, getting hurt, resolving conflict, testing limits. Overprotection in the real world, combined with unlimited access to the virtual world, has flipped kids into defend mode instead, a threat-vigilant, anxious state, arriving at exactly the wrong developmental moment. Real-world risk has been minimized, while virtual-world risk, harassment, predatory contact, algorithmic content, social comparison, has been maximized. It's the opposite of what healthy development actually requires. Underneath all of this is the broader loss of play-based childhood. Drawing on evolutionary and developmental psychology, echoing researchers like Peter Gray, Haidt argues that free play, unsupervised, imaginative, sometimes risky play with other kids, is essential for building executive function, emotional regulation, conflict resolution skills, and resilience. Since the 1980s, fear of strangers, which is statistically unfounded, given that crime rates have actually fallen, fear of litigation, and increasingly intensive parenting norms have steadily eliminated the unsupervised outdoor play that used to define American and Western childhood. That left a vacuum, and phones and tablets filled it. The book is action-oriented, and Haidt proposes 4 collective norms to reverse the trend, insisting that individual families acting alone can't solve what is really a collective action problem, since kids need their peers to also be off their phones for real-world play and independence to feel viable again. The first norm is no smartphones before high school, meaning kids can have a basic phone for calls and texts if needed for safety, but an internet-enabled smartphone should wait until at least age 14. The second is no social media before age 16, delaying those accounts until the brain is more capable of handling social comparison and identity pressures, paired with much stronger age verification enforcement than current laws provide. The third is phone-free schools, requiring phones to be locked away, for example in yonder pouches, for the entire school day rather than just during class, to restore attention and real in-person socializing. And the fourth is far more unsupervised play and childhood independence, actively encouraging free play, letting kids walk to school, run errands, and resolve their own conflicts, instead of supervising and intervening constantly. He directs these recommendations at several different groups. Parents should delay devices, prioritize sleep, model good behavior themselves, and coordinate with other parents so kids aren't socially isolated for opting out. Schools should adopt phone-free policies and rethink the zero recess, overscheduled model of childhood that's become common. Tech companies should redesign products with age-appropriate design standards, remove manipulative engagement features aimed at minors, and improve age verification. And government should raise the effective age of internet adulthood, which he suggests should be 16. Pass laws requiring real age verification, and hold platforms accountable, echoing regulations already emerging in the UK and EU. Haidt also spends time addressing the objections he expects. To the argument that correlation isn't causation, he responds with the weight of converging evidence across many different study types and countries. To the idea that teens are simply reporting their struggles more honestly now, reducing stigma rather than reflecting a real change, he points out that the data includes hospitalization and suicide rates, which aren't self-reported and show the very same trend. To the suggestion that the 2008 financial crisis, climate anxiety, or political polarization explain the shift, he notes that the timing doesn't fit those explanations nearly as precisely as it fits the smartphone and social media rollout, and that similar economic conditions in the past never produced this pattern. And to critics who point out that some individual studies only find small effects, he argues that small effects at a population level can still represent a massive public health problem, the same way small individual level effects of tobacco or lead exposure add up to enormous harm across a whole society. His overall message is ultimately a hopeful one. Because this crisis was caused by a specific, identifiable, and fairly recent shift in norms and technology, he argues it can be reversed through coordinated changes among parents, schools, tech platforms, and governments. He frames it as an urgent public health issue, on the same scale as past successful interventions like seatbelt laws or smoking regulation. Rather than as some permanent feature of modern life, we simply have to accept. The book became a #1 New York Times bestseller and sparked major public debate. It's been credited with galvanizing real action from parents and schools, contributing to a wave of school phone bans. But it hasn't gone unchallenged. Some psychologists and social scientists, including researchers like Candace Odgers and Jeff Hancock, have pushed back, arguing that the causal evidence is weaker than Haidt presents, that adolescent mental health trends have multiple contributing causes, and that screen time on its own is too blunt a variable to explain the crisis. Haidt has responded publicly to these critiques and keeps a companion website updated with new data and rebuttals for anyone who wants to dig deeper into the debate.